In epistemology, rationalism is the view that regards reason as the chief source and test of knowledge, or any view appealing to reason as a source of knowledge or justification. More formally, rationalism is defined as a methodology or a theory, in which the criterion of the truth is not sensory but intellectual and deductive. Rationalists believe reality has an intrinsically logical structure. Because of this, rationalists argue that certain truths exist and that the intellect can directly grasp these truths. That is to say, rationalists assert that certain rational principles exist in logic, mathematics, ethics, and metaphysics that are so fundamentally true that denying them causes one to fall into contradiction. Rationalists have such a high confidence in reason that empirical proof and physical evidence are unnecessary to ascertain truth. In other words, there are significant ways in which our concepts and knowledge are gained independently of sense experience. Because of this belief, empiricism is one of rationalism's greatest rivals. Different degrees of emphasis on this method or theory lead to a range of rationalist standpoints, from the moderate position that reason has precedence over other ways of acquiring knowledge to the more extreme position that reason is the unique path to knowledge. Given a pre-modern understanding of reason, rationalism is identical to philosophy, the Socratic life of inquiry, or the zetetic clear interpretation of authority. In recent decades, Leo Strauss sought to revive classical political rationalism as a discipline that understands the task of reasoning, not as foundational, but as maieutic. Rationalism should not be confused with rationality, nor with rationalization. In politics, rationalism, since the Enlightenment, historically emphasized a politics of reason, centered upon rational choice, utilitarianism, secularism, and irreligion, the latter aspect's antitheism later ameliorated by utilitarian adoption of pluralistic rationalist methods practicable regardless of religious or irreligious ideology. In this regard, the philosopher John Cottingham noted how rationalism, a methodology, became socially conflated with atheism. In the past, particularly in the 17th and 18th centuries, the term rationalist was often used to refer to freethinkers of an anti-clerical and anti-religious outlook, and for a time the word acquired a distinctly pejorative force. The use of the label rationalist to characterize a world outlook which has no place for the supernatural is becoming less popular today. Terms like humanist or materialist seem largely to have taken its place, but the old usage still survives. Philosophical usage. Rationalism is often contrasted with empiricism. Taken very broadly, these views are not mutually exclusive, since a philosopher can be both rationalist and empiricist. Taken to extremes, the empiricist view holds that all ideas come to us a posteriori, that is to say, through experience, either through the external senses or through such inner sensations as pain and gratification. The empiricist essentially believes that knowledge is based on or derived directly from experience. The rationalist believes we come to knowledge a priori, through the use of logic, and is thus independent of sensory experience. In other words, as Galen Strawson once wrote, you can see that it is true just lying on your couch. You don't have to get up off your couch and go outside and examine the way things are in the physical world. You don't have to do any science. Between both philosophies, the issue at hand is the fundamental source of human knowledge and the proper techniques for verifying what we think we know. Whereas both philosophies are under the umbrella of epistemology, their argument lies in the understanding of the warrant, which is under the wider epistemic umbrella of the theory of justification. Theory of justification. The theory of justification is the part of epistemology that attempts to understand the justification of propositions and beliefs. Epistemologists are concerned with various epistemic features of belief, which include the ideas of justification, warrant, rationality, and probability. Of these four terms, the term that has been most widely used and discussed by the early 21st century is warrant. Loosely speaking, justification is the reason that someone holds a belief. If A makes a claim, and B then casts doubt on it, A's next move would normally be to provide justification. The precise method one uses to provide justification is where the lines are drawn between rationalism and empiricism. Much of the debate in these fields are focused on analyzing the nature of knowledge and how it relates to connected notions such as truth, belief, and justification. Theses of rationalism. At its core, rationalism consists of three basic claims. For one to consider themselves a rationalist, they must adopt at least one of these three claims: the intuition, deduction thesis, the innate knowledge thesis, or the innate concept thesis. In addition, rationalists can choose to adopt the claims of indispensability of reason and/or the superiority of reason, although one can be a rationalist without adopting either thesis. The intuition, deduction thesis. Rationale. Some propositions in a particular subject area are knowable by intuition alone, still others are knowable by being deduced from intuited propositions. Generally speaking, intuition is a priori knowledge or experiential belief characterized by its immediacy, a form of rational insight. We simply just see something in such a way as to give us a warranted belief. Beyond that, the nature of intuition is hotly debated. Using valid arguments, we can deduce from intuited premises. For example, when we combine both concepts, we can intuit that the number 3 is prime and that it is greater than 2. We then deduce from this knowledge that there is a prime number greater than 2. Thus, it can be said that intuition and deduction combined to provide us with a priori knowledge. We gain this knowledge independently of sense experience. Empiricists such as David Hume have been willing to accept this thesis for describing the relationships among our own concepts. In this sense, empiricists argue that we are allowed to intuit and deduce truths from knowledge that has been obtained a posteriori. By injecting different subjects into the intuition, deduction thesis, we are able to generate different arguments. Most rationalists agree mathematics is knowable by applying the intuition and deduction. Some go further to include ethical truths into the category of things knowable by intuition and deduction. Furthermore, some rationalists also claim metaphysics is knowable in this thesis. In addition to different subjects, rationalists sometimes vary the strength of their claims by adjusting their understanding of the warrant. Some rationalists understand warranted beliefs to be beyond even the slightest doubt. Others are more conservative and understand the warrant to be belief beyond a reasonable doubt. Rationalists also have different understanding and claims involving the connection between intuition and truth. Some rationalists claim that intuition is infallible and that anything we intuit to be true is as such. More contemporary rationalists accept that intuition is not always a source of certain knowledge, thus allowing for the possibility of a deceiver, who might cause the rationalist to intuit a false proposition in the same way a third party could cause the rationalist to have perceptions of non-existent objects. Naturally, the more subjects the rationalists claim to be knowable by the intuition, deduction thesis, the more certain they are of their warranted beliefs, and the more strictly they adhere to the infallibility of intuition. The more controversial their truths or claims and the more radical their rationalism. To argue in favor of this thesis, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a prominent German philosopher, says, the senses, although they are necessary for all our actual knowledge, are not sufficient to give us the whole of it. Since the senses never give anything but instances, that is to say particular or individual truths. Now all the instances which confirm a general truth, however numerous they may be, are not sufficient to establish the universal necessity of this same truth, for it does not follow that what happened before will happen in the same way again, from which it appears that necessary truths, such as we find in pure mathematics, and particularly in arithmetic and geometry, must have principles whose proof does not depend on instances, nor consequently on the testimony of the senses. although without the senses it would never have occurred to us to think of them. The innate knowledge thesis rationale. We have knowledge of some truths in a particular subject area, S, as part of our rational nature. The innate knowledge thesis is similar to the intuition, deduction thesis in the regard that both theses claim knowledge is gained a priori. The two theses go their separate ways when describing how that knowledge is gained. As the name of and the rationale suggests, the innate knowledge thesis claims knowledge is simply part of our rational nature. Experiences can trigger a process that allows this knowledge to come into our consciousness, but the experiences don't provide us with the knowledge itself. The knowledge has been with us since the beginning and the experience simply brought into focus. In the same way a photographer can bring the background of a picture into focus by changing the aperture of the lens. The background was always there, just not in focus. This thesis targets a problem with the nature of inquiry originally postulated by Plato in Meno. Here, Plato asks about inquiry. How do we gain knowledge of a theorem in geometry? We inquire into the matter. Yet, knowledge by inquiry seems impossible. In other words, if we already have the knowledge, there is no place for inquiry. If we lack the knowledge, we only know what we are seeking and cannot recognize it when we find it. Either way, we cannot gain knowledge of the theorem by inquiry. Yet, we do know some theorems. The innate knowledge thesis offers a solution to this paradox. By claiming that knowledge is already with us, either consciously or unconsciously. A rationalist claims we don't really learn things in the traditional usage of the word, but rather that we simply bring to light what we already know. The innate concept thesis rationale. We have some of the concepts we employ in a particular subject area, S, as part of our rational nature, similar to the innate knowledge thesis. The innate concept thesis suggests that some concepts are simply part of our rational nature. These concepts are a priori in nature and sense experience is irrelevant to determining the nature of these concepts. Some philosophers, such as John Locke, argue that the innate knowledge thesis and the innate concept thesis are the same. Other philosophers, such as Peter Carruthers, argue that the two theses are distinct from one another. As with the other theses covered under rationalism's umbrella, the types and number of concepts a philosopher claims to be innate. The more controversial and radical their position, the more a concept seems removed from experience and the mental operations we can perform on experience, the more plausibly it may be claimed to be innate. Since we do not experience perfect triangles but do experience planes, our concept of the former is a more promising candidate for being innate than our concept of the latter. In his book, Meditations on First Philosophy, René Descartes postulates three classifications for our ideas when he says, "Among my ideas, some appear to be innate, some to be adventitious, and others to have been invented by me. My understanding of what a thing is, what truth is, and what thought is, seems to derive simply from my own nature. But my hearing a noise, as I do now, or seeing the sun, or feeling the fire, comes from things which are located outside me, or so I have hitherto judged. Lastly, sirens, hippogriffs and the like are my own invention. Adventitious ideas are those concepts that we gain through sense experiences. Ideas such as the sensation of heat, because they originate from outside sources, transmitting their own likeness rather than something else and something you simply cannot will away. Ideas invented by us, such as those found in mythology, legends, and fairy tales, are created by us from other ideas we possess. Lastly, innate ideas, such as our ideas of perfection, are those ideas we have as a result of mental processes that are beyond what experience can directly or indirectly provide. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz defends the idea of innate concepts by suggesting the mind plays a role in determining the nature of concepts. To explain this, he likens the mind to a block of marble in the new essays on human understanding. This is why I have taken as an illustration a block of ain't marble, rather than a wholly uniform block or blank tablets. that is to say what is called tabula rasa in the language of the philosophers. For if the soul were like those blank tablets, truths would be in us in the same way as the figure of Hercules is in a block of marble, when the marble is completely indifferent whether it receives this or some other figure. But if there were veins in the stone which marked out the figure of Hercules rather than other figures, this stone would be more determined thereto, and Hercules would be as it were in some manner innate in it, although labor would be needed to uncover the veins, and to clear them by polishing, and by cutting away what prevents them from appearing. It is in this way that ideas and truths are innate in us, like natural inclinations and dispositions, natural habits or potentialities, and not like activities, although these potentialities are always accompanied by some activities which correspond to them, though they are often imperceptible. The other two theses, the three aforementioned theses of intuition, deduction, innate knowledge, and innate concept, are the cornerstones of rationalism. To be considered a rationalist, one must adopt at least one of those three claims. The following two theses are traditionally adopted by rationalists, but they aren't essential to the rationalist's position. The Indispensability of Reason thesis has the following rationale: the knowledge we gain in subject area, S, by intuition and deduction, as well as the ideas and instances of knowledge in S that are innate to us, could not have been gained by us through sense experience. In short, this thesis claims that experience cannot provide what we gain from reason. The Superiority of Reason thesis has the following rationale: the knowledge we gain in subject area S by intuition and deduction or have innately is superior to any knowledge gained by sense experience. In other words, this thesis claims reason is superior to experience as a source for knowledge. In addition to the following claims, rationalists often adopt similar stances on other aspects of philosophy. Most rationalists reject skepticism for the areas of knowledge they claim are knowable a priori. Naturally, when you claim some truths are innately known to us, one must reject skepticism in relation to those truths. Especially for rationalists who adopt the intuition, deduction thesis, the idea of epistemic foundationalism tends to crop up. This is the view that we know some truths without basing our belief in them on any others, and that we then use this foundational knowledge to know more truths. Background: rationalism, as an appeal to human reason as a way of obtaining knowledge, has a philosophical history dating from antiquity. The analytical nature of much of philosophical inquiry, the awareness of apparently a priori domains of knowledge such as mathematics, combined with the emphasis of obtaining knowledge through the use of rational faculties, have made rationalist themes very prevalent in the history of philosophy. Since the Enlightenment, rationalism is usually associated with the introduction of mathematical methods into philosophy as seen in the works of Descartes, Leibniz, and Spinoza. This is commonly called continental rationalism, because it was predominant in the continental schools of Europe, whereas in Britain empiricism dominated. Even then, the distinction between rationalists and empiricists was drawn at a later period and would not have been recognized by the philosophers involved. Also, the distinction between the two philosophies is not as clear-cut as is sometimes suggested. For example, Descartes and Locke have similar views about the nature of human ideas. Proponents of some varieties of rationalism argue that, starting with foundational basic principles, like the axioms of geometry, one could deductively derive the rest of all possible knowledge. The philosophers who held this view most clearly were Baruch Spinoza and Gottfried Leibniz, whose attempts to grapple with the epistemological and metaphysical problems raised by Descartes led to a development of the fundamental approach of rationalism. Both Spinoza and Leibniz asserted that, in principle, all knowledge, including scientific knowledge, could be gained through the use of reason alone, though they both observed that this was not possible in practice for human beings except in specific areas such as mathematics.